I think we need to move on to a remarkable piece of video which features President Obama. And I'd invite viewers and listeners to listen very carefully to what the President says, because he's made an extraordinary announcement.
But the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar.
So yes, if you didn't catch that, he said we're speeding up the funding of ISIL forces. And now, of course, this little video clip has come from Next News Network, so we've got to thank them for that. And they're asking, is this a Freudian slip? What do you think, Brian?
Well, I don't think it is. I asked you that question when I first found out about the video, but when you consider the deliberation that he makes this statement, and also the fact that he's using some form of prompting system, an accident if it was an off-the-cuff remark, but this seems to have been scripted. And so we seem to have finally an admission that it is the Americans, amongst others, who are actually supporting the very terrorists that we are supposed to be so frightened of, because they're going to murder us in our beds. And maybe we can reinforce this idea a bit more with an article from Veterans Today. Thank you very much to the person who pointed this out to us. I think it was Adrian. Well done, Adrian. So look at the headline. ISIS German-run Patriot air defence system hijacked in Turkey. German missile battery receives orders from unknown hackers. Now, the initial part of this is that there's been a suggestion that these very sophisticated Patriot ground-to-air missiles operated by the German army in Syria, in Turkey on the Syrian border, were hijacked, and somebody unknown was giving these systems commands. Now, I find this very difficult to believe, because if this has been achieved, it means that none of the existing cryptology systems for NATO for the Germans are valid, which would be a fundamental and massive security breach. So I think something else is going on here. I think really what this is saying, that somebody else other than normal governments is actually giving these missile systems the instruction. So Mike, if we just pop that one back briefly, let's add a bit more of the comment from that article. Editor's note: it's now clear it is Germany shooting at Syrian planes and helicopters attacking ISIS positions. Why are the Germans in Turkey? What could their mission possibly be? There is little doubt that Germany is providing an air umbrella over al-Nusra and ISIS forces. Who has the power to make them do that? Now, I think this is where the suggestion of hacking comes from. Russia today, the German Patriot air and missile defence systems stationed at the Turkish border with Syria have carried out unexplained commands allegedly issued by unknown hackers, according to a German media report, since rebutted by the German government. It goes on to say that US-produced missile systems belonging to the German Bundeswehr armed forces and based on the territory of NATO's ally Turkey since 2013 have been compromised. And that was a report in the German Spiegel. So if we think this through, this is very, very serious indeed, because what we are now starting to see is, while our own governments tell us that, of course, the Islamic State, ISIS, al-Nusra, etc. are operating against us as terrorists, what is actually happening on the ground is that our own public money is being used to support those terrorists. And now we're getting a suggestion both from the American president himself that this is the case, and we're getting a further strong hint from this story that German Patriot systems have been used to help defend ISIS forces on the ground. So is this possible? Well, what we'd like to do is to take you back to the story of Conservative MP Brooks Newmark. And while I'm taking you through this, I think we'll be trying to get Justin Walker online. And at the end of this section, we'll see if we can bring Justin in for some comment. Well, here we go. Probably some of you will remember this, which splashed all over the headlines. Tory minister quits over sex photos. And this is Brooks Newmark, who was busy tweeting pictures of himself, his naked body, to young ladies. Eventually it all broke surface, and he had to stand down for the good of his family, you'll understand. Well, this was a little bit of stuff and nonsense, but we want to look at it a rather different way, because here's the quality of the man who was busy sending out pictures of himself in the buff. Turn away if you're of a weak disposition. What we were interested in is this is the same man who was boasting of his meetings with those linked to Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra terrorists. So this was at the time when David Cameron was warning how dangerous Al-Qaeda was, and indeed how dangerous associated terrorist groups like Al-Nusra were, but he was an MP who had clear links. Well, part of the story was reported here in the Essex Chronicle, and if we have a look at the insert, it says, on Sunday night, Mr. Newmark travelled to the Turkish-Syrian border to meet with rebel fighters, including General Idris of the Free Syria Army on Monday, then to visit a makeshift hospital for wounded soldiers at Rayalani 2 days later. And it says that since his return, that's since Brooks Newmark's return, he's spoken of his sadness and regret that fellow MPs have given the green light to President Assad to continue using chemical weapons. Now, of course, his beef there is the fact that while he was away, there was that historic vote in Parliament where MPs finally voted not to attack Assad and Syria, and this upset Mr. Newmark deeply, to the extent that he felt he had to apologise to General Idris. Now, the date of that article was August the 30th, 2013. Where does it take us? Well, interestingly enough, if I just put that on the bottom there, a more detailed story was also published in the Daily Mail, and the UK column team took great interest in the Daily Mail story, because it was in that article that Brooks Newmark was boasting not only had he met General Idris, but that General Idris's Free Syrian Army was directly connected to Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. Well, Brooks Newmark was a busy boy over the period, not only sending out explicit photographs of himself, but he was busy tweeting that he'd had a busy day meeting the Syrian opposition, including General Idris and President Saba. And then he says Assad's 14th chemical weapons attack is a tipping point in the civil war. Now, we had tackled Brooks Newmark in person, asking him for his evidence of chemical attacks by Brooks Newmark. By President Assad. He could provide no evidence at all. He simply referred to other documents widely available on the website, saying possibly, could, maybe, might have. So a lot of spin going directly into the Daily Mail article, to the extent we challenged it. And first of all, we emailed Mr. Newmark himself. He failed to respond. On September the 11th, 2013, I personally emailed my local MP, Gary Streeter, another Tory, and asked that he obtained a full and proper reply to the questions put to Brooks Newmark. And what we asked him was, what were the names of the individuals and their status organisations that were present in the meetings that Mr. Newmark attended with General Idris? And we just got a complete load of rubbish back from Gary Streeter. He wouldn't answer the question, but he tried to fob us off by saying Syria appears to be moving in a different direction. Things were moving on. So Tory Gary Streeter looked after his little Tory friend in the buff, didn't want to answer serious questions about was the British government supporting terrorist organisations overseas. Well, we didn't stop there. We sent a letter to the local Conservative Association because we wanted a proper answer. So we repeated the questions, essentially hard copy letter, and of course we received no reply from Streeter of any substance. What were these Tory MPs so frightened of? We think it was this rather. And think about this in line with what you've just heard the American president say, that they are supporting these terrorist organisations. So in his remarks to the Daily Mail, Brooks Newmark said this, if I just highlight it: there are about 150,000 Free Syrian Army fighters and 7,500 Jabhat al-Nusra fighters which have links with al-Qaeda. And I'm stressing the links to al-Qaeda. So why would a Conservative MP be freely admitting that the man he met, General Idris, was linked through to al-Nusra terrorists and al-Qaeda? The story got more interesting because a short time later, the Daily Mail had then taken steps to hide this article. This is the screenshot showing that when you searched for the article, this is the comment: at the request of the publisher or their representative, this historical cached copy has been blocked. We think there's some pretty dirty dealing going on at the moment, and it appears to be that the British government is lying not only to the British nation, but of course to countries overseas, while saying we should be very frightened of terrorist organisations. It would appear from what we see that it is actually the British government and partners supporting those organisations. Global Research was also at the time picking up what was going on, and it pointed out that on August the 13th, 14th, 2013, Western-sponsored opposition forces in Turkey started advanced preparations for a major and irregular military surge, and it said that initial meetings for this took place in a bunker at the headquarters of the Free Syrian Army. Now, we tried to get out of Brooks Newmark whether he was actually present in that bunker. He didn't want to answer, and these are the questions he still hasn't answered. In what capacity, official or private, did you meet Syrian Free Army General Idris? Who was present in that meeting? Was this meeting sanctioned by David Cameron? If not, who did sanction it? What exactly do you know about the links between the forces of General Idris and al-Qaeda? Are you aware that al-Qaeda is a terrorist organisation? Who paid for this trip and meeting? And of course, true to the Conservatives' opaque transparency policy of Cabinet Minister Francis Maude, we have received no answers. Justin, I think we've got... I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, so I've got a number of
points
to make here.
Good.
So
please
go on to the next one. Yesterday, David Cameron was asked about the Srebrenica genocide, and he said it was the largest act of genocide since the Holocaust on the mainland of Europe. As he said, 8,300 people murdered. The first thing is to be very clear: it was genocide, and to say to people who question that are genocide deniers. So that's a very interesting statement from David Cameron, because the first thing he does is that he associates Srebrenica with the World War II Holocaust, and then he uses the term denier. So he is implying that anybody that denies that Srebrenica was a genocide by the Serbs on the Muslim population there are genocide deniers. That's quite an incredible thing, isn't it, Brian?
It is incredible, and of course we look at, well, the figures are in the millions of people who've died in the Middle East as a result of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown's and Cameron's policies. That is genocide in these unlawful overseas wars. I think this government's getting very frightened that it's becoming so easy to see what their true colours are. He's having to make up propaganda himself now on the spot. If you dare criticise us, you're a Holocaust denier. It's a pretty cheap Conservative trick, I think, Mike.
Yeah, so this was during Prime Minister's questions yesterday that he said this. He went on to say, we've been holding the pen to the United Nations in drafting the resolution that will bring the world together to make sure it is remembered in the right way. He's talking about Srebrenica, remembered in the right way, and we should be doing everything we can to keep this at the front and centre of European politics so that people realise that this was a genocide, and we must learn the lessons from it. So how does this link with what you've just said about Newmark? Well, of course, we'll come on to that in a second. I just want to say, if we look at the next one,